Hello. If you plan to learn how to set up a CI/CD pipeline and deploy your code to Kubernetes, this video is for you. So what do you need for this? First of all, you need a server, which supports 64-bit architecture. You can use an old server, a notebook, or a Raspberry. You need a lot of RAM, at least 8 gigs, for your containers, and using a multi-core processor is also a good idea. I chose Raspberry, the model with 8 gigs of RAM. It's a better choice if you plan to run it all the time because of the low power consumption. Then you need to install an operating system. Install it with the Raspberry Pi imager to an empty USB disk, SD card, or an SSD in an external box, which you can boot via USB. So download PyImager, run the imager, and choose your operating system. So choose a general purpose OS. Ubuntu server is a common choice, and choose the 64-bit version. Then choose your storage device and write the image to the disk. When you are done with the configuration of your OS and you can log into your server, it's time to install Kubernetes. Kubernetes runs your containers in pods and has a lot of useful features like scaling, failover mechanism. At the beginning, use a lightweight implementation like K3s. The installation is easy and the configuration is written into this file. So let's install it. I would start with upgrading my OS. Then you have to install some packages to be able to run containers and K3s, like Docker and extra Raspberry modules. Then install K3s and your one node cluster is running. Read the Kubernetes configuration from this file and add it to your local config file on your workstation. Don't forget to edit the IP address of your host. The last thing you need to install and set up on your server is a version control system to store and manage your source code. After the installation, you should create a repository for your code. Create a directory on your file system where you would like to store the source. Go to that directory and initialize the repository. When it's done, we can try to commit and push something into this new repository. You will have to set up username and email for the first time. Good, it seems to work, but we have to create a file which we can commit and push. So let's create a README file. Okay, now it seems to be fine. It's time to set up your workstation. You will need an integrated development environment, which makes the whole development and deployment process easier. I would recommend PyCharm. It supports Git, Kubernetes, and Docker very well. When you installed it, try to clone your repository. Configure the URL, specify your OS user, the IP of your server, and the directory where you created the repository. Then specify where you would like to see the source code on your workstation. If everything went fine, you should see the empty README file you have just created. Try to commit and push something into your repository. It's enough if you just modify the README file. It's possible that you run into this issue, so you have to modify your repository on your server, or initialize it next time as bare. That's all. In the next video, we will configure PyCharm integration with our Kubernetes cluster and Docker. Then we prepare a Docker container which builds and deploys our code to the Kubernetes cluster. For this, we need also a Docker registry to store our images. If you have a better setup, ideas, any suggestions, please leave a comment. I try to keep this environment as simple as possible.